Welcome to Season 2 of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Yes, a second season, the first episode of the second season. New mission statement, new approach, a new outlook. Same title. I like the title. Same Jackass host. I like the Jackass host. In our new season, we will explore many of the same topics, but we will look at them from quite a different lens. And I'm going to go over it, probably nauseating for some of you, over the course of the next 30 to 40 minutes. What I would like to do, and it was something that I should have done in every episode last season, is first of all, thank each and every one of you who's listening. Granted, I know all of you, but thank you. And if you really like this podcast, please give it a 5-star rating, write a review, go to my Patreon account, donate $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, whatever you think appropriate. I'm not asking you for the world. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast on Patreon. Please make that little effort because it really does help this podcast. New mission statement, new approach, and an example of how your dear host is going to approach Season 2. Let's get underway.
Act 1, new mission statement.
It took me 3 episodes to actually articulate a mission statement for this very podcast. I can go on about all the things that I thought that I wanted to do when I first started this podcast, but in feeling into the lack of a mission statement, the lack of a very clear direction, like the rest of us, I simply wanted to be heard. I wanted my voice to be heard. We all live in a society today where, although we are more connected than we ever have been, we have more outlets to reach one another than we ever have. Friends, neighbors, family, people from other states, people from other countries, people halfway across the world. What do people complain about? They don't have a voice. They aren't being heard. Most of us feel like we're never being heard by anyone. I listen to the radio. I don't understand the music. I still fancy myself a man about town. I go out to the restaurants. I go out to the bars. I do not understand the music that is playing. I do not understand the energy of many of the people that are enjoying that music. It seems foreign to me. No, that's not strong enough. It is foreign to me. I truly do not feel it. As the kids used to say when trying to inspire you to dance, you have to feel it. I do not feel it. I turn on the television. I see people on the television speaking nonsense. None of it makes any sense to me. I don't feel like there's anyone out there who's speaking to me. I don't think I'm alone in that. In fact, I feel like there's millions and millions of people who have all of these options for television, all of these options on the internet, all of these options for programs and for art and literature and entertainment. And we're just cycling through it all because most of it is like McDonald's. It's just empty calories. A lot of us, the traditional things that are supposed to fulfill us, getting good grades in school, being accomplished, being recognized and rewarded in your academic pursuits, then going on to get a really good job, making money, having a family. I don't see a lot of happy people out there having gone through that gauntlet, including me. So if I have to come clean about why I started this podcast, why it took me 3 episodes to come up with a mission statement, I just wanted to be heard, and I didn't really want to come on here and say, you know what, I started this podcast because I want to run my mouth and I want to be listened to versus me having to be dictated to, having to listen to others. Like everyone else, I'm in my ego. That's my own bullshit. If you don't feel like you've been heard at home with your parents, or at school with your teachers, or with your significant other, or at your job, you'll find some outlet. This is my outlet. This is my Twitter. This is my Instagram. And having said that, after recognizing this is my social media outlet, I had to feel in, well, what about this is different than those other social media outlets? Why don't you just go on Facebook? Why don't you just go on Instagram? Why don't you tweet? It hit me why I've been so bad at marketing this podcast. Those mediums are cesspools. They are really cesspools. You have to work extremely hard, and people do. God bless them. They diligently work hard at keeping the content, the medium, sanitized from all of that bullshit that is just waiting for them with one errant click. So I decided I'm going to wade in. I'm going to wade into this sea of fecal matter and see exactly who I am, how this is reflecting on the way that I see the world. Here I sit, having done a season full of podcasts, several times throwing temper tantrums, proclaiming my insight into the way the world works and how we'd all be better served if we just all listened to me. Well, spend a little time on Facebook, you spend a little time on Twitter, you spend a little time on Instagram, and although they may not be as articulate, they may not be as long-winded, that's the other way to look at it, that's pretty much what everybody else is doing. Here's the world that I see. Here's the way that it works. Everything is wrong that I say is wrong. Everything is right that I say is right. You idiots would be better served if you would just listen to me. Now, over the break that I took, the hiatus between my last podcast episode and this new season, season number 2, I listened to some of those episodes. I reflected on some of the things that I said. I had moments of wisdom. I had moments of enlightenment. But I also had moments of frustration. I had my little temper tantrums. What I really didn't want to see was that this, maybe because it's a longer form, maybe because I could articulate myself in a different way, this is a comfortable social media outlet for myself. In my ego, I am both the victim and the perpetrator. The victim, because in order to promote this podcast, in order to get it out into the world, I have to navigate social media, and then I get to proclaim that it's such a shithole, it's such a cesspool, so here I am the victim. But what am I doing in my very podcast? I'm the perpetrator. I'm looking out at all these people and saying, you're a bunch of stupid assholes. I believe the quote was attributed to Buddha. How you see the problem is the problem. You come out, you're in your ego, you disclaim this, you proclaim that, you get yourself some Sean Hannity on one side, you get yourself some Rachel Maddow on the other side, you preach to the choir, maybe you have success, maybe you don't. For me, I left the last season of the podcast unfulfilled. I knew that there was a better me, there was a funnier me, there was a wittier me, there was a more clever me, but most of all, there was a more insightful me that didn't come out. Somehow, it was all meant to be. I was meant to go through that first season and throw some fits and stumble a little bit to come to that realization, the paradox. And that's all it is. Life is a paradox. The lesson in our lives, how we elevate ourselves, is identifying the fact that many of the things that we believe, many of the things that we love, that we hate, many of the things that we resonate with or that we're dissonant to, it's a paradox. Once you identify as much and you can see the paradox, you can actually become insightful. I am on a podcast that I'm going to broadcast on social media, and I'm going to sit there and lament the existence, the makeup, the user base, the governance of social media. And I'm sure you've gotten to this point and thought, if you don't get to a better point than just running your mouth and tell me what the mission statement is, I'm going to turn this goddamn thing off. Fair enough. I did not come up with this. I have heard it. You have heard it. It's out there in the ether. It's out there in the lexicon, whether it be inspirational, Tony Robbins type stuff, religious. Think greater than your environment. Think greater than your environment. How often am I going to lament social media on this podcast and then turn around and tweet about my podcast so I'll get more listeners? How often am I going to chase clicks on social media, and in order to do so, I'm going to have some tagline about how social media sucks? Think greater than your environment. Now, how am I going to break that down? I'm breaking that down in my everyday life right now. Feeling like you have no voice because the government doesn't listen to you, because people in the mainstream media or on social media, they don't listen to you, or they aren't responding positively to you. Seeing family relationships be frayed and dissolved over politics or social issues, feeling like you're screaming into a void with people that you're blood relatives with. Think greater than this environment. First and foremost, look at this country right now. Look at how many things that we have going for us, and we couldn't feel more desperate. We couldn't feel more desperate. Thinking greater than your environment is first and foremost realizing that you aren't a product of your environment. The first person that you need to listen to is yourself. And once you finally listen to yourself, realize you're not that smart. You're not that significant. Nothing that you've ever tweeted is that important. Why so dour? Why so down? Why am I throwing tantrums on this podcast? I'm going to be playful with it. I'm going to have fun. Now, I might give some people a little joust, a little ribbing, but too frequently, I felt that my own tone, that what I was resonating, it was too often getting angry in order to get my place, my vibration, my mental space in that of self-righteousness. Me being the perpetrator that I'm lamenting. I'm having to go down in order to do that. That is not raising myself up. And looking at some of the topics that I covered and the things that I said, and I don't like to admit it, but it's the truth, I was chasing clicks on social media like any 18-year-old girl waving her boobs in front of a camera, or these guys doing some jackass thing, embarrassing themselves, lowering themselves just to get the clicks. I did the same thing. And it wasn't necessarily fun. And it wasn't me. And I'm not doing it anymore. So what am I going to do? Well, let me tell you, dear listener. Let me tell you.
Act 2, the approach.
I've been to a lot of places. I've read a lot of things. I've seen a lot of things. And I tried to communicate as much in the first season of the podcast. And what I've realized over the course of not only the last few months of that podcast, of season 1, but particularly the months that I've had in this hiatus, the more that I've seen, the more that I've read, the less I know. In the immortal words of Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age, and I know what you're saying. Please tell me what song that is. It's The Bronze by Queens of the Stone Age. Consult your local Google machine. Thank me later. The more I've found the less I've been around. Once you realize that, although you may know a lot, you don't know a lot. You may have read a lot, but there's a lot more to read. Although you've seen a lot of places, there's a hell of a lot of places you haven't been. You realize that's your ego. Your ego wants all of the sum of the things that you've done to have that type of meaning. I've reached this pinnacle. I've reached this zenith. The fact of the matter is, the journey never stops. You've never reached a point. You're always on the path. And if you're on the path to having to lower your vibration, get into some place of anger or frustration or resentment in order to feel self-righteous, you failed. Think about that. You failed. Whatever your dream is how you see the world. If you dream the world beautiful, you'll see beauty in the world. If you dream the world ugly, you will see the ugliness in the world. Is that a controversial? Is that a problematic? Is that a unproven, a dubious statement? No. What are people dreaming? What are we dreaming? We are dreaming that ugliness so that we can get to the point that we want to get to. We want to be both the perpetrator and we want to be the victim. We want to be able to choose the different points in our lives where we get to be the perpetrator, and then we can turn around whenever we want and choose to be the victim. I'd like to sit here and say that I'm above all that because I'm a fucking genius and I would never stoop to as much, and yet I have numerous episodes of this very podcast that contradict as much. Longtime listeners may have just noted that a profanity was uttered and it was not bleeped out. The profanity. The word fuck. Well, I'm going to talk about that. Part of my new approach is being authentic to myself in thinking greater than my environment. And what does that mean? I chased clicks, as I said earlier, and I chased them shamelessly. I have never started a podcast. I didn't know a lot about social media, and in particular, I had never really navigated iTunes in any meaningful way. Apple makes it very easy for you to spend money by buying songs, and that was the limit of my understanding of how iTunes operated. Starting this podcast, Apple has a very thorough process of vetting the content that they put on their platform. And they have an entire section for whether or not your content is for mature audiences. And of course, they actually state that you're going to have an opportunity for a wider audience, for larger broadcast reach, if you don't click the mature audience box. But Apple's not done there. Apple will actually vet segments of your podcast. So I thought to myself, I'm not going to speak as authentically as I would because I want the podcast to blow up. So I'm going to censor the content. I am going to censor myself. Is that thinking greater than your environment? Is that actually being true to oneself? So no, dear listener, I'm not going to edit the fucks anymore. I don't give a fuck well enough to edit the fucks. That brings me to the next point, the next approach for this podcast in thinking greater than your environment, not being attached to the outcome. I really wanted this podcast to take off, and I began to do things in order to make that happen. And what were those things? Well, it was listening to other people. It was going online and reading about how to broadcast, and then how to publish, and then how to market. Chasing hashtags, doing certain types of carousel posts on Instagram, all of these different things. And I tried to incorporate many of them into what I was doing. I altered content. I actually spoke to things that I don't care about, and I ignored things that I do care about. Well, dear listener, that's done. I am not going to be attached to the outcome, not the outcome of what I'm actually putting out on this podcast, and not the outcome of whether or not it's ever going to be heard by anybody else. The only way this would ever work for me to where I felt like I could continue to do it is if I'm doing something that I feel like is authentically me. Have you ever tried to step outside of yourself and really put yourself in the place of somebody else, particularly a public figure? I did this with respect to kind of the Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity mold or the Rachel Maddow mold. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle that you're on or what political party you lean towards or whatever the social issues are. Think about these people. Think about having to go on to television every night and get in this vibration of indignation, of frustration, and get there simply so that you can convey to the converted, preaching to the choir, this sense of self-righteousness. I didn't particularly enjoy it in these 30, 45, 60-minute weekly podcast episodes. There were episodes that I knew I hadn't really hit on what I wanted. These people are doing that every single night. Yes, there is a reward at the end of that road. Millions of dollars. And to the extent that you could call it such, public adoration. Hope the money gives them hugs and loves them up, because I didn't feel happy doing it, and I can't imagine that they're actually happy doing it. They may be content. They may have a sense of pride and of accomplishment. But does that make them happy? Can you see and feel the paradox right there? The paradox of having to make yourself angry, to make yourself feel the self-righteousness necessary to convey that type of message on a daily basis. And then once you step away, feel happiness. What they do doesn't resonate with me when I'm listening to it. Why would I then turn around and do it when I'm the one speaking? Once I let go of the attachment to the outcome, I can speak freely. And as I said earlier, I just want to be heard. We all just want to be heard. And to the extent that someone hears another person speaking their authentic truth, speaking freely, that's going to be what will help this podcast blossom and spread to others. We have, as a society, as a community of people, whether that be in this country, on this continent, on this planet, we have a lot of things in common. And one of them is we don't feel that we're being heard. But take the flip side of that. Are we speaking authentically? Are you freely speaking your truth? And that brings me to the final part of this new approach. Let's look at things. Let's approach things. Let's be aware of things from below and not above. Getting into this vibration of anger or frustration or indignation so that I can turn around, so that Rachel Maddow can turn around, so that Tucker Carlson can turn around, so that Sean Hannity can turn around and be in self-righteousness. That works. It works because so many of us are doing that anyway. And yet what we all lament is not hearing someone speak their authentic truth, someone not speaking freely. No. When you look at it, when you approach it from below, we are the ones who are not speaking freely. We are the ones who are holding back, who are editing the things that we say, the things that we feel, trying to measure out what's going to be received by the listener, or even how we're going to receive it in our own mind. I looked at my notes from sitting with Mother Aya, and one of the things that I had forgotten, and I know this, and we all know this, but one of the things that I had forgotten that the shaman, that many of the instructors said, you speak to yourself like no one else in your life. If someone came up to you on the street and spoke to you the way that you spoke to yourself, you'd get into a fist fight, if not a knife fight, if not a gun fight. As much as we want to say, I restrain myself because of the way I'm worried, or I'm concerned, or I'm fearful about how the things I say will be received, who judges you more harshly than you? So when you're going through this journey with Mother Aya, and you have this really heavy sense, this negative voice in the back of your head, and you're thinking, what is this thing external to me? What have I invited into my life? It's not external to you. That's you. That is your superconscious. That's your soul. And you've been speaking to yourself in that tone, in that manner for so long, your soul says, that's how I'll speak to you. Because that way I know you'll listen. Well, I'm tired of speaking to myself that way. And once I got tired of speaking to myself that way and I could actually hear it, then I went back and listened to some of those podcast episodes and realized that's the reason why you've got that tone. You speak to yourself that way. And you can speak to others that way without even noticing it. So I'm going to approach things now from below, not above, not lecturing, not dogmatic, not like I've got everything figured out, but that I'm noticing these things, and that in noticing these things, I can raise them as issues for us to have a conversation about. Again, life is a paradox. The lesson of life is in the paradox. So how does this new mission statement, how does this new approach translate into what the content of this podcast is going to be about?
Act free, my God. How much longer are you going to drone on with this hippie bullshit?
Now I know what some of you are out there saying. Wow, this sense of enlightenment isn't tantalizing. Oh, it's so delicious. How much longer are you going to drone on with this hippie bullshit? It's coming to a conclusion, dear listener. It's coming to a conclusion. As I said earlier, if you dream beautiful, you see beautiful. If you dream ugly, you see ugly. And what have we as a community of people been dreaming? Clearly ugly, because all we see out there is ugly. But what does that allow us to do? We get the ugly, and then we can get angry, and we can get frustrated, and we can get indignant, and then we can get self-righteous. Now, one of my favorite topics last season, besides sports, was the political landscape, politicians. And one of the most poignant things that I said that really resonated with me when I re-listened to it was whether or not any of us really wanted to be a politician. You want to talk about a blessing and a curse. You want to talk about an actual paradox. Democracy is a blessing and a curse. Democracy is a paradox because we have this freedom. We have this freedom to go out and choose our leaders. And then when we choose our leaders, we can then lament the landscape of choice, right? So we are the perpetrator and the victim. We go out and vote for these people. Then they reflect who we are. That's all they are, is a reflection of us. And then we can claim victimhood. The fact of the matter is, though, that none of us, no right-minded person wants to go out and be a politician. They are actually doing us a public service. You know what I enjoy? On a daily basis, on a daily basis, and maybe you're like me, maybe, water. I'm fond of it. I get up in the morning. I go over to the toilet. I urinate in it. Does the urine come splattering back at me? No. You know what it hits? Water. Listen to this, though. This is fucking amazing. I press a button on the toilet. It flushes. That water goes away. More water comes out. More water flows back into the bowl. I might take a step to the left. I might take a step to the right. I got a shower. It's got water. I got a sink. It's got water. You want to talk about a tantrum throwing little bitch? Turn on that water tomorrow and don't turn the knob but an eighth of a revolution. Get into that shower ice cold and then tell me that we've got problems in this country. Not one person listening to this podcast, and I doubt any 10,000 people who are going to listen to this podcast over the course of the next 1,000 years can articulate with any degree of certainty or precision or, I wouldn't even say mastery, I'd say a rudimentary understanding. How does the water get from point A to point B? Point A being source of water, lake, river, what have you, and get to your house. If you think rudimentary explanation is, well, there's a water department. That is not a rudimentary explanation. That's like me asking you to explain to me, how does a jet engine work? And you say, well, Boeing is a company that exists. That's not how a jet engine works. Unfortunately, we love us some water. We love us some roads. We're filthy. We're filthy, filthy creatures. We're able to take a bag of our own filth and place it in a receptacle, and somebody else comes and picks it up. For nominal fees, all of this is done for us. All of this is provided to us. I wish that the landscape, the political landscape was different, but we have all of these things because of politicians, because of bureaucrats. Think about it. When we are ready as a community to operate in a communal sense, in a socialist sense, we can get rid of the politicians. But until then, we need them. I don't want to do it. You don't want to do it. Considering I know practically everybody who listens to this podcast, thank you very much, friends, family. Considering I know you all, I admire the fact that most of you would never dare enter into the fray of politics. But then to turn around and use the political landscape as an opportunity for judgment, for disdain, to get to that place of anger and indignation so then we can feel self-righteous. It's an exercise in futility. And I want to reiterate, these politicians are simply a reflection of us. They are a reflection of us. This notion that somehow the politicians are betraying the people, what are you talking about? How are they getting into those political offices in the first place? We vote for them. They completely and totally represent us, reflect who we are, and answer all of the questions about us. Do we ever take a really intense, hard look at any of the problems that face us as individuals? No. We want an easy answer. We want an easy solution. Do we ever take a hard look? Do we ever take an in-depth look at how we form relationships? Whether it be with family, whether it be with a spouse, with children, your coworkers, friends, enemies. No. We have health problems. We have mental problems. Do we ever take a really hard look at the source of any of this? No. We're looking for quick, easy, simple solutions. And politicians give them to us. Was it Einstein that said the same type of thinking that caused the problem can't solve the problem? Right? But that's what we do. That's what we do as voters. The thinking that caused the problem, we believe we can follow in that same vibration, and it will then solve the problem. And in that way, we are collectively insane. What is insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We are collectively insane. We keep electing the same type of people, the type of people that reflect who we are, and somehow we want them to be better than us. We want them to be more dignified than us, more virtuous than us, more altruistic than us. When you look at it, when you approach it from the bottom, they're doing us a favor by entering the political arena, by putting themselves out there in such a open, visible, disgusting way. They're not going to win that election by being completely forthright and honest. They're open and they're visible. But then they have to go and speak out of both sides of their mouth. They have to give us simple, canned solutions to extremely complex problems, because otherwise we won't vote for them. They have to sacrifice real relationships with people, with their families, with their children. Does a politician really have any friends? I mean, many of those friendships center around what? Political affiliation. As I said last season, numerous times, Washington, D.C. is a den of thieves. And I think you could probably say the same for most every other state capital in this country. And that phenomenon is certainly not exclusive to this country. If the good Lord could dispense with the politician, they would have already been gone. Is it not an ironic situation? Is there not a paradox that you can go back to the Bible and the stereotype of the politician in the Bible, one of the oldest written texts on planet Earth, has not evolved in 1, 2, 4,000 years? So the tantrum over the politicians, and even over different political issues, I'm pretty much done with them. I'm going to think greater than this current political environment. I'm going to try to be playful with it and have fun. I'm not going to be attached to any of these outcomes. I'm not going to think that one politician being elected versus another is going to be the end of this country. And certainly, I can look at it, I can approach these situations from below instead of looking at it top down, from above. Like the stern, proverbial headmaster out of some movie. I stand over the subjugated and speak down to them. We have enough of that in our society. We have enough of that in our daily lives. I certainly don't want to have that done to me, and I'm tired of doing it. Welcome to my evolution. And frankly, I can be bold and make changes like this because no one listens to this anyway. It's not like I'm going to be taking a cast member off the number one show in television and trying to replace him with some substitute actor. It's not like I've got some hit recipe or hit formula that's been working so well. I have the liberty to make changes. There is freedom in anonymity. To those of you that have actually taken the time, that have spent your time to listen, although rare, to actually comment or provide feedback, I truly appreciate it. I still have a hard time. I still condemn you for failing to get 50 or 60 of your closest friends and relatives addicted to this simple podcast, but that's okay. Hell, given the landscape of what's gone on over the past 2 years, Not many people have 50 or 60 members of their family or friends that they could actually reach out to without getting a profanity-laced tirade in response over who you voted for or whether or not you're wearing a mask. And there you have it, dear listener. Little spoiler alert. I have been pining away, taking notes, organizing these chaotic, hectic thoughts at times, and I will be addressing, as if the President of the United States, the state of the nation, here in 2022. That should keep you salivating for a week to come back for episode 2. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.